Fabulous. I'm Brenda Von Rautenkrantz. We are located right here in Sykesville, Maryland. We're excited today to have on the show Suzanne Simpson with Simpson's Law. She's going to be talking about estate planning, some of the things that we really want to know a little bit more about. Let's go there now. I'm so excited, Suzanne, to have you on the show. Now, is this something about estate planning that you always kind of aspire to do?
Well, I aspire to be a lawyer, and while in law school taking different classes, it's kind of like when you go to college, you're not sure what your major is going to be. I found that after practicing different kinds of law out of law school, that estate planning really suited me well. I really enjoy hearing people's stories. In fact, 2 people that left yesterday were like, gosh, I felt like I was in therapy. And I said, well, that's why I'm a counselor at law, right?
Okay,
so an attorney counselor at law. So I love hearing people's stories and helping them figure out what they're going to do with their estate.
So
and putting it together.
So your background when you started, a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit. Is that what you wanted to do when you were little?
It was one of the things I wanted to do when I was little.
Really?
There were 3 different things, and that was one of them. And my uncle and aunt in Germany were in the legal profession. So my uncle was the dean of a law school in Germany, and my aunt was an administrative judge. So I used to be able to visit when we were living over there, go to school with my uncle or go to court with my aunt, and I just thought it was really interesting and fun.
That explains why my grandmother was Italian and I made pasta. Well, it does go back to things that you feels familiar or you love or things like that. But now, how long have you been doing this?
So I've been practicing law since 1991.
Okay.
And I've had my own firm since 2003. So
Wow.
for quite a while.
So for people who don't know what estate planning is, I always think, well, I don't have an estate, well, I don't need to plan it. As people say that too, I really don't have what?
Yes,
right?
lots of people think that. And so we kind of, in our language, consider an estate something kind of lofty and something kind of large. But really, it's just the property that you own.
Yeah.
Whether it's financial products that you own, like your IRAs and pension plans, money that you have in the bank, money that you may have invested in a mutual fund or stocks. So those are part of your estate. Your house is part of your estate. Your car is part of your estate.
So do you think people are confused?
Right.
Estate means the estate,
Right.
right?
They think it's this big lofty house,
exactly.
but it's actually just the things that you own.
Okay. And so does that hinder somebody just calling up, well, I don't have anything? Does that hinder a little bit? Because today maybe it's an awareness day.
Oh, right. So I do have people call me up quite a bit and they say, well, my situation is very simple. And then when we start talking about it, we realize it's not as simple as they might have thought to begin with.
Okay.
So that happens more often than not.
So when we're talking a little bit about when you're putting things in order, or is it when something happens that people contact you?
So there's 3 different ways people contact me. Yes, as you said, the last incident is when something happens. So it could be that they get a serious diagnosis, or a member of their family passes away.
Okay.
Or even that they're going to go on a great vacation.
Yeah.
And they're thinking we don't have anything in place. So those would be situations where it's more urgent.
Okay.
Right? But a lot of people contact me just about the time that they're thinking about retiring.
Okay.
So they might have done a plan a long time ago that focused more on their children.
Kids. Yeah.
Now they're like, the kids are grown. We want to retire. Our financial situation has changed. So we're going to look at this now.
So is anybody proactive? Like, oh, let's go ahead and plan something.
Oh, yeah, of
Oh,
course.
really?
I mean, as an attorney, we're not really allowed to go out and say, hey, do you need an estate plan,
Right,
right?
exactly.
We have to wait for them to come to
Right.
us for the ethics reasons. And yes, I mean, our phone is ringing all the time. So even though there's only 30% of the population that actually goes through with the planning, there is enough work out there for all of us attorneys in the area
to do that. Is that so? Describe some of the different types of laws, just so people know that. So there's divorce and there's
right.
different.
So
let's describe some.
So there's There's kind of the category of person-to-person law, right?
Okay.
So that would be, as you said, family law. Family law to me is really breaking up the family.
Yeah.
You know, it includes divorce.
It should be breaking up family.
It includes divorce and custody,
Okay.
and support, child support, spousal support, those sorts of things. And I did practice in that area for about 10 years.
Okay.
Very, very heavily in that area. The good news is that that's all about property too, right?
Oh, yeah.
So then the second category for like person-to-person law is the estate planning, probate and trust administration, helping families after someone dies.
Okay.
Making sure that disabled family members are taken care of through what's called a supplemental or special needs trust.
Okay.
Guardianships for people that didn't sign powers of attorney, giving someone else authority to handle their finances.
Okay.
And medical decisions while they're still alive, but they might have got dementia or Alzheimer's or an accident.
Okay.
So that's another kind of family type of law, but there's separate categories.
Okay.
Yes, there's employment law, right? So
Right.
that might be a person to company type of situation.
Yeah.
Then there's commercial law between different companies.
Wow.
There's all different categories. There's the malpractice, medical malpractice. There's immigration law. We have the laws dealing with that. So there are lots of different areas. Tax law, all kinds of different areas of law.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, because a lot of times people, they don't know where to go, right?
Right.
In some of those areas.
And I think it's important that when you do go see a lawyer, you try to find one that focuses on the area that you're seeking assistance with.
Right.
I mean, I don't know about employment law, right? Mm-hmm. So if someone came to me with an employment law question, I would refer them to someone else that focuses on that area. There are some attorneys that have a general practice.
Okay.
So they're dabbling in a little bit of everything. You really need to make sure that they have the experience in the particular area that you're asking them help with.
What is, when people do that, I think, I always think of a movie when it's your last will and testament, or what is the last will and testament?
It's just a document. So it's a document that says last will and testament on the first page. So it's your last time that you're stating what your wishes are with regard to what you owned, what you created a legacy with, in terms of things in your lifetime.
Okay.
So it's your last will. It's you're saying what your will is, and you're testifying as to how you want that to go for the last time.
Okay. But is there a stature of time limit? Like, well, that doesn't count anymore, or will that always hold up?
It will always hold up until you decide to change it. So
wow.
if you change the way in Maryland you can change your mind about this is literally ripping up your original will, destroying it. So for example, if your family can only find a copy of the will, it's presumed that you ripped up the original. So, and this happens, people move away to assisted living or whatever, and they lose their will in the meantime. But if the family agrees, that really was Dad's will, then they can agree that the copy can be entered.
Well, is there any fights? Like,
oh yeah, there are fights. Definitely. Okay. Sometimes there are fights with family members. Another issue, we have one right now, or two cases where the person hand wrote on the will. So that doesn't count. When you change your will, it's called a codicil to the will rather than an amendment. The word is codicil. It has to be done with the same formality. This is a technical jargon. It has to be signed with the same formality. So you need to have two witnesses who can testify. There's a paragraph at the end that they watched you sign it. You were all in the same room. Nobody left. They know you weren't coerced.
Right.
You were competent. All of that.
So, but it can get shady, right?
It can get shady. Yeah, I mean, the shady things are, when someone is being coerced, they might not have all their faculties anymore. They might be on the border. It's hard to know. So when that situation comes up in my practice, and more often it is that the person actually is okay, but the other family members are trying to say that they're not. So we go get them evaluated by a neuropsychologist.
Okay.
And the neuropsychologist, either they say yes, they're out to lunch, they really shouldn't be signing anything, that can happen.
Is that your call then to do that? Is that your call?
Well, it is my suggestion. That is my suggestion that they do that. And I've had 2 cases where the will was questioned later that I wrote for the client. And fortunately, I had those letters in the file
to say
they were competent. So that's very good evidence to have.
So talking about what is it called? You said a revocable will. How is that used?
Okay, so it's called a revocable living trust.
Oh, okay.
So with the will, your estate goes through probate with the Register of Wills office in the county where you were domiciled at the time of your death, resident and domiciled. So it's a court process. If you have a revocable living trust, you transfer title of your assets to your trust, and then when you pass away, there should be no court proceeding. So you'll still have a will. It's called a pour-over will. You're pouring over your assets into the trust that you might have forgotten to title. Ideally, that doesn't exist.
Right.
So ideally, then we just file the will with the Register of Wills office and call it a will of no estate. Now, clearly there are assets, but there's nothing going through probate.
Okay.
So with the trust, your account would be titled in your trusts instead. So rather than like the Joe Smith last will and testament, it's the Joe Smith living will. Living trust.
Living trust. All right. Well, it's complicated. I mean, isn't it? I mean, maybe not to you, but I mean to other people who it's not in their wheelhouse, and they're like, wow, it's just a lot to know what to do when, right? So what happens if you don't have a will?
So if you don't have a will and you pass away, that's called dying intestate without a will. INTESTATE. So intestate. So if you
not intestines?
Not intestines. So if you die without a will, then the Maryland statute governs how your estate is going to be distributed. And so that might not be the way you want it to go, right? Because you might have specific things you want to leave to specific people. You may want to leave funds to your grandchildren. There might be things that you want to do that aren't set, not in the statute. So there's issues. If you're married to a person and you have children in common, now the spouse actually inherits. But just last year, before last October, the spouse would get 50% and the children would get the other 50%.
Really?
Yes, so it was really important.
So that
you would
is
not
that why everybody's
that.
here in Maryland?
I mean, you wouldn't expect that. You'd think everything would go to your spouse, but it wasn't the case. And there's different situations depending on whether they're your children or the decedent's children, and all these things, how the money passes.
But how did they keep that all this time? I mean, how long? You just changed, so what other
law just changed?
But did the other states do this too?
So most states that I'm only licensed in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. In most states, everything does go to the surviving spouse. That was something different in Maryland. And now we have the situation too where people aren't getting married, right?
Well, yeah.
They're partners.
Right.
And so now you can register as a qualified domestic partner with the Register of Wills office so that your partner, if you die, your partner doesn't have to pay inheritance tax. Because people that aren't married are subject to inheritance tax.
Okay.
Right? Inheritance tax in Maryland is 10%. So children are exempt, spouses are exempt, grandchildren are exempt, siblings are exempt, parents are exempt,
So who gets?
and charities. But a lot of times, we have clients that they're the last person standing. So they're leaving money to their friends, people that have been taking care of them, that sort of thing. So those people are subject to the inheritance tax.
The inheritance. So a little bit, what would you do, say, what it says here, add my child to my deed. What if you don't add anybody?
Well, you don't really want to add your child to your deed during your lifetime unless you do it a specific kind of way.
What would that be?
So that would be a life estate deed. That's kind of like a transfer on death you might have heard of, or payable on death type of document. If you just add your child to your deed and they become an owner now, they're gonna lose out on the step up in basis of the property. So
What's that mean?
So for example, if you bought your house for $100,000 and it's now worth $200,000, when you pass away, your child gets the basis at $200,000. So when they go to sell it, there's no capital gains tax to pay. Whereas if you add them to the deed while you're alive, they take your basis of $100,000, they sell it for $200,000, they have to pay the tax on that gain.
Wow.
And it's the same thing with stocks too. You get it's called a step up in basis to the date of death value.
Okay. You hear the cat meowing?
I do.
No,
So cute.
we're here on the
Little
farm.
orange
You'll hear
cat.
horses banging too. That happens too. So what happened? So you hear sometimes if an older person is in the house and they want to leave their house to their child, but now they may have to go to a nursing home, right?
Right. Okay. So with that, there are life estate deeds. That's kind of the transfer on death type of deed.
Okay.
That they own the house, but they have a deed that says, I own the house for the rest of my life, but upon my death, it immediately goes to Brenda. So
Okay.
that avoids probate of the house. It won't go through that process with the court.
Okay.
It'll just automatically be Brenda's house.
So that has to be drawn up in a lawyer's office, correct?
Well, actually, anybody can do whatever they want. Pro se is called doing it without a lawyer.
Okay.
But if you haven't gone to law school and taken all the continuing education classes,
Yeah.
you might be at risk.
Yeah.
So, I just think it's better when people do use the services of an attorney.
I mean, just on that note, do you ever find people, they only know what they know? So many mistakes people make, right, along the way.
Right, so with these computer programs,
Yeah.
LegalZoom and all of this, people can go down the wrong path with those. Those programs kind of ask you questions, and depending on how you respond, it asks you the next question.
Right.
So you can end up going down, of the wrong path with that. And I've seen, and it's actually not too bad for the other side of our practice, where we're helping people after someone dies. If there are mistakes, it's more work for us to fix.
Right.
Right? It's not the way you want to have to do things.
But is it, they just don't want to spend the money and they go, I can beat the system, we can do, right?
So yeah, it might be that. It might be, they just feel that they can do it themselves. They're do-it-yourselfers generally, right?
Yeah.
So they do that, or they see ads on TV that make it seem like it's super easy. The other thing with those programs is that they're not attorneys that are going to be having your back if something goes wrong.
Right.
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 Whereas attorneys, we have to be insured, and we have to
Right.
take a certain number of classes and
Yeah.
all those
But
other things.
what about, it's not even a question here, but what about when you have all these mistakes along the way in estate planning, the kids think they're going to get this and that, and then they come after you. Have you ever have stories that they're like, no, we were supposed to get that? You have?
So the stories that I have like that it's never been me personally, right? It's been, they said, well, one story is that the aunt passed away, and so nieces and nephews thought they were going to inherit, and some of them did, and some of them didn't. So the ones that didn't were very upset about that, and so they sued the estate. But it ended up being that, this lady had her reasons for not wanting to leave the money to the other people.
So do they-
those things can happen.
So do they get anything then?
It depends. It depends. It goes to the judge. It can go to a jury, and so the outcome could depend. In this case, they got way less than they expected, but it was settled.
But it was settled that way.
Yeah.
So what happens if you have a relative, a nephew, something, and you want to make sure that they have enough money, and you're going to give, 25% of your estate to them? Is that a wise thing to do so they could get help?
Sure. I mean, it depends on the situation. If the kind of with your wording, it sounded like you were talking about a person that might be disabled.
Yes.
So if it's a disabled person and they would qualify for government benefits, usually those benefits are needs-based. So if they suddenly inherit a lot of money, if they have been getting benefits, they can then be disqualified until that money runs out. So what you can do instead is set up a supplemental needs trust where the money is yours that you put in this trust upon your death.
Okay.
And it's not counted as an asset of the person you're trying to help. Someone else is the trustee.
Okay.
They manage the money for that person. They pay the bills for that person.
Okay.
And if they're getting, for example, a housing allowance, the trustee might say, well, I'm not gonna pay for housing, but I'll pay for this other thing that you might need.
Okay.
Mhm.
Does that happen a lot? I mean, do you see that?
I see it quite a bit. There's so many kids now with autism.
Yeah.
And just, mental health challenges. So yes, we do see that. We also see it with spouses. So say your spouse has dementia.
Yeah.
They can live a long time with that. And they might need to go into a nursing home.
Right.
So if you predecease them and they get all this money, that can disqualify them from the nursing home. So we have cases where
Oh, wow.
one spouse puts their money into a trust for the surviving spouse.
Okay.
Mhm.
Now, do you ever work with nursing homes or do you ever work with some kind of agencies that they need some extra help with all this? 'Cause-
So there are attorneys that's their practice. They work with
Okay.
nursing homes trying to get people qualified for Medicaid.
Mhm.
I'm not one of those attorneys. I work with private individuals, helping them privately, sort those sorts of things
Okay.
out.
Okay. Because I would think that would be a big need today.
Yes.
Don't you? I
Yes.
mean,
Mhm.
everybody's
It is.
worried about who's going to get what,
Right.
or especially when it gets down to their end of their life or
Mhm.
whatever.
Right, making sure that they're taken care of.
Exactly.
Yes.
What if you were doing a retirement? A lot of people probably come to you during their retirement time. How do you know it's the right person, the time? Tell me a little bit about retirement and estate planning.
So I think, they might be sent to me through their accountant or their financial advisor,
Okay.
or they might be seeing they're getting all their AARP documents
Yeah.
now in the mail, and
Yeah.
they're being advised to go ahead and look at this. For people that are retiring, they have probably decades to go before they're gonna die.
Right.
They're more likely to suffer some sort of illness or accident that could be extensive and lose their ability to make decisions. So that's
Okay.
why it's super important to sign financial and medical powers of attorney, where you choose who is going to be making those decisions for you if you're not able to make them yourself. The consequence of not doing that is maybe being subject to a guardianship. So a guardianship is a court process that typically involves a person who is disabled mentally and cannot handle their affairs. Anyone literally can apply to be the guardian.
Okay.
So
it doesn't-
usually it is the spouse, usually it is the grown children, but not always. And I had an interesting case a couple years ago where I was appointed by the court to represent, they call it the potential ward, the person who's going to be
Okay.
subject to
Sounds
guardianship.
bad already.
Yeah. So it was an argument between the sister, the wife, and the ex-girlfriend.
Oh,
We were
wow.
all in court. And so, the poor gentleman, he would have probably have liked to choose who he was going to end up with. And he ended up with the ex-girlfriend, which really was, you wouldn't think that would be the right thing, but in this particular case, it was absolutely the right
Wow.
outcome. Yes.
And you have to go to court a lot?
I don't go to court very often.
Okay.
I go to court for the guardianship hearings. I have a co-counsel that's really good that handles litigation for our firm when things get, more antagonistic.
Do you like that? I mean, do you like that kind of get in there and,
I used to like that a lot. Especially when I was doing practicing divorce law, but I kind of got out of it. I like to be more of the counselor and try to prevent things from getting to that point.
yeah.
For example, I have a case recently where there was a daughter from the first marriage and then 2 daughters from the second marriage. Dad dies, and then 4th daughter walks in the courtroom that was from a relationship in between the two that nobody knew about. So
How do you prove that? DNA, but-
DNA, birth certificate,
Right.
etc. So they were, furious, and they were kind of taking it out on the girl. And I was like, she's your half sister. Like, is this how you want this relationship to go?
Yeah.
It's really not her
Wow.
fault that she was born in these circumstances.
Yeah.
So you can decide to cut her out and, have your argument and all of that, or you can decide think about it and maybe embrace her into your family.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
you know,
well,
right?
that is counseling,
That's
right?
counseling,
Trying to
right? Yeah.
make peace where there is
Exactly.
no peace.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think if you you probably see a lot of different things like that just pop up, and you're like, I didn't see that coming. All of it.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you something. Will any of the estate be taxed? Tell me about the tax.
So it depends. Most estates in this area are not taxed. In order to face state estate tax, your estate has to be more than $5 million.
Okay.
Or for a married couple, $10 million.
Okay.
At the federal level, for federal estate tax, right now with inflation, it's about 13.5, 13.7 million. You can pass tax-free. Again, with your spouse, it's double that.
Okay.
Now that law is set to sunset the end of next year.
Ooh.
So we don't know what's going to happen.
Wow.
We don't know if it's going to go back to where it was
Yeah.
before they gave us this huge increase in the exemption. So we need to plan carefully and think about what the consequences might be.
Wow. Well, everybody wants to know, they all want an edge, don't they?
Yes.
Like what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
But if you, for our audience, what is something that you would recommend to them? I mean, just hearing you, and what would you recommend for just estate planning?
For estate planning, I would recommend at the basic level, have your will in place so that you have control over where your assets go after you die. Get those medical and financial powers of attorney in place so that if something happens to you while you're alive, you've chosen, you have control, you've chosen your guardian angel.
Right.
A lot of people's assets are now mostly in retirement, so the retirement passes via beneficiary designation on those forms you fill out with the administrator at work or at the financial institution where you set up your IRAs. It's not going to go through your will. So make sure that those are filled out properly because you want the right people to get that money. If you've been divorced, don't have your ex-spouse on there. Same with life insurance. Yeah. You know, if you're married later in life, don't have your parents on there because you forgot to go back and change it to your spouse. If you have most of your investments in stocks and mutual funds, if you have more than one property, you really want to be looking at a revocable living trust because it gets more complicated then to go through the probate process.
Well, I think knowing some of these things, people get lost in it. I mean, for you, you sound so I'm like, okay, this is a little complicated even for my mind. But I think if people had an understanding or estate planning for dummies, something like that, but to know what to do next in their time of life, right? Because when you're having kids, you're like, I can't even think about that, right?
But that is a time to be thinking about it because if you're out for dinner and you get in a car accident and die, it's your will that says who gets the kids.
Yes.
Right? So that, if you and your spouse agree, which is an issue, a lot of times they don't do it because they can't agree. Right. Or they think it has to be a family member. And it doesn't have to be a family member. In fact, even in my family, our siblings weren't in a position at the time that we had our daughter to be the guardian, so we named a really good friend of ours, right? And then over time that changed. Yeah, so you can always change it.
You can always change it, exactly. Well, this was a lot of information, Suzanne. I loved it all for estate planning. We have learned a lot for that, and I have to thank you for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you
coming
for
to the country. I loved it. I want to thank our guests for tuning in today. If you'd like to be a guest or come on the show, you can contact me at brendavonr@gmail.com. We will see you next time on Fit to Be Fabulous. We'll see you later.